Good evening to Europe, good morning to Asia, and good afternoon to those all across the fruited plains. You're now locked into the worldwide 20-megabit beacon of truth, hope, and justice, otherwise known as your weekly dose of the Crimson Pill. I, your host, the great and all-powerful Antonin Fiore. Hey, just make sure you don't peek behind the curtain, folks. Encourage you to unfasten your seatbelts and turn on all portable electronic devices as we embark on this week's voyage of the USS Crimson Pill. Our course has been charted for the Isle of Light by way of the Straits of Knowledge and the Sea of Tranquility. In the event of turbulence, the captain reminds you that your seat cushion, folks, is no substitute for an open mind. If you're seated in an exit row, you are now invited to move forward to our first-class cabin of truth at any time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your Saturday, July 9th, 2011 edition and dose of the Crimson Pill. I am your host, Antonin Fiore, and the title of today's program, if you will, NASA's cover-ups, Elenin's friends, and the curious case of Smedley Butler. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the listening audience, your humble host is a researcher in these fields of occultism, esotericism, your government's lies and cover-ups. And for the last year and a half, approximately, your host has been researching very carefully this curious case of Smedley Butler. Now, who is Smedley Butler, you may be asking? Well, first, let's get the name correct so that you can do some continued research on your own. Smedley, S-M-E-D-L-E-Y, Butler, was born July 30, 1881, deceased June 21st, 1940. He was nicknamed the Fighting Quaker and Old Gimlet Eye. And how do we achieve his significance? Well, he was a Major General in the U.S. Marine Corps. At the time of his death, and arguably, perhaps even still today, he was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. During his more than 33-year career as a Marine, he participated in military actions in the Philippines, in China, Central America, and the Caribbean during the Banana Wars, and also in France in World War I. Now, to give us some more further context of just exactly the heights of service and commitment to his role that Mr. Butler achieved, and why it was that he was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history, by the end of his career, he had received 16 medals from the United States, multiple from other countries as well. 5 of those medals from the U.S. alone were for heroism. He is one of only 19 people to receive twice the Medal of Honor, and only one of 3 people to be awarded both the Marine Corps Brevet Medal as well as the Medal of Honor, and the only person to be awarded both the Brevet Medal along with 2 Medals of Honor, all for separate actions. Ladies and gentlemen, this curious case of Smedley Butler that we're about to examine today, by way of returning our conversation from last week's episode of The Crimson Pill, in which we talked about NASA's lies and cover-ups, as well as we talked about the secrecy, the era of compartmentalization and classification of information that we exist in, we're going to begin our discussion and return to those subjects by way of talking more about our curious case of Smedley Butler. I want to talk just a bit about Mr. Butler's experiences, some of what he's written, as well as some of the major things that he had a chance to discover, to disclose that he was involved in. Along the route, we're going to talk about Mr. Butler's own writings and his quotes from his time of service. We're going to paint the picture of his involvement in what was referred to as the business plot. The business plot is something, again, that you can continue your further research, but today we'll be able to provide a few signposts. We'll paint the picture and the introduction of how it is that this curious case of Smedley Butler, he describes his military service as being that of a racketeer. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned during this brief commercial break, and we'll come back with our discussion of Smedley Butler. And ladies and gentlemen, you're back with the Crimson Pill. I'm your host, Antonin Fiore, and we are talking about the curious case of Smedley Butler, one of the most distinguished and decorated Marines to serve in the history of the United States Marine Corps. And I wish, folks, that we had the time in today's program to give you a very thorough exposition of the life and service of Mr. Butler, but I need to just hit some of these highlights to get to the important parts due to our limitation in time. One thing to know about Mr. Butler, his father was a lawyer and a judge, and also for 31 years a congressman and chair of the House Naval Affairs Committee during both the Harding and Coolidge presidential administrations. His maternal grandfather was Smedley Darlington, a Republican congressman from 1887 to 1891. So he didn't just fall off the haystack, or the hay rack for that matter. Mr. Butler was born into a family where he had some experience and some exposure to geopolitical machinations on a national scale and in fact, global scale. But let's get back to his personal life. Yeah, he did live a life and an upbringing that's not so much unsimilar to the average American, maybe like you and I. He attended Westchester Friends High School. While he was in high school, he became captain of the baseball team and quarterback of the football team. Now listen to this as the first stage of his commitment. Against the wishes of his father, a powerful congressman, he left school, Smedley did, 38 days before his 17th birthday. He was still 16 years old when he wanted and did enlist in the Marine Corps during the Spanish-American War. And that's where he began his service, folks. And again, I would encourage you to do some research on the internet so that you can read just exactly how amazing the course of his military service truly was. Your humble host is going to skip forward in the life and the story of Mr. Butler about 33 and a half years. In other words, to the end of his military service. Actually, not quite that far, because still during his military service, at the urging of his father in 1924, the newly elected mayor of Philadelphia, W. Freeland Kendrick, asked Smedley Butler to leave the Marines to become the director of public safety for the city of Philadelphia, the official who would be in charge in this new role of running the city's police and fire departments. Now, Philadelphia's municipal government was notoriously corrupt, and Butler initially refused. Kendrick then asked President Calvin Coolidge to intervene. President Coolidge contacted Butler and authorized him to take the necessary leave from the Corps. At the request of the President of the United States, Butler served in the post from January 1924 to December 1925. What a fascinating time and operation that it was that he ran in an attempt to try to clean up the city of Philadelphia. Please do your own research to capture the details. I'm going to skip forward. On January 1st, 1926, his leave from the Marine Corps ended, and the President declined a request for a third extension. Butler received his orders to report to San Diego, and he prepared his family and his belongings for the new assignment. After almost 2 years after he had left that office, Butler resigned, having resigned under pressure, stating later that, quote, cleaning up Philadelphia was worse than any battle I was ever in. And if you do your research and understand the context of exactly what sorts of battles and conflicts he was in the midst of, having earned all of those decorations that we mentioned, I think that you might be impressed and perhaps chilled by that quote that he made during his experience, once again, at the behest of the President of the United States, to serve in that capacity as the Director of Public Safety for the city of Philadelphia in an attempt to clean it up. Now, years later, after retiring from the Corps, he began lecturing at events and conferences, and after his retirement from the Marines in 1931, he took up this circuit of lecturing full-time. He donated much of his earnings from his lucrative lecture circuits to the Philadelphia Unemployment Relief. So let's remember our period of history here, 1931. We're in the heart of the Great Depression. And in this opportunity that he has to make earnings for himself with the lecture circuit, he's donating most of those proceeds, to unemployment relief back in that very self-same city that he was asked by the President of the United States to help clean up. Now, folks, that's an interesting introduction to Mr. Butler's service, because cleaning up is, in fact, what he was asked to do in lots of parts of the world. And in his career, during the course of this lecture circuit that we discussed, he oftentimes spoke very candidly about his observations on his service and what he was asked to do, how and why he was asked to do it. I'm about to read to you a quote directly from Smedley Butler. And folks, I hope you'll tune in and understand that this was a man who had dedicated his entire life, his energy and his resources to his service to the United States military, and I want you to hear his own words in reflection upon the purpose and the ultimate value or outcome, the results, the objective of that service. In Smedley Butler's own words, I quote, "I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period I spent most of my time as a high-class thug for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico, and especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers from 1902 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China, in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents." Now, ladies and gentlemen, these are the words of Smedley Butler himself, made in retrospect upon reflecting on his service and upon reflecting at how it fit into the larger context of the large-scale matrix, the ultimate purpose and games of these bankers. And in fact, I think his words fell short because he didn't refer to the international banking influence in this particular quote that he makes reference to later. And now, ladies and gentlemen, is when we have to turn our attention to the most chilling element of this curious case of Smedley Butler. It is referred to generically by the media as the business plot. The business plot. In November 1934, Butler alleged the existence